In this week's demo, I'm going to be building several examples of tables. As you can see, I've already built the basic HTML page and outlined some headings of the different areas that we're going to cover. To build a table, it's a lot like a list. It's a complex element in that there's multiple tags involved. The first tag that you're going to use is the table tag. So this should be the first tag and the last tag. There. Inside the table row, you're going to put the cells. Those are called TDs, which stands for table data. And I would always recommend that you build your table structure first before you add any content to it, because once you start adding content, it can get a little muddy as to where one thing begins and another thing ends. It's a lot easier to look at when it's just the structure. So right now we have a table with one row, two columns, and no content, right? So I'm going to add another row. Okay, so now we have a table with two columns and two rows. So I'm going to go ahead and put some basic content in here. Okay, so when I save that, you can see that it appears over here on the right, and there's no padding or spacing or borders on my table currently. You can add all of those things using attributes. So the first one I'm going to add is cell padding, and I'm going to set it to 0 for the moment. Same with cell spacing and border. I will set to 1. Okay. Alright, so when I save that, you can see that now I've added a border around my table. If I change the size of that, it will get nice and big, and it has some bezel on it. Okay. Alright, so now let's play with the cell padding and cell spacing. If I change the cell padding, you can see that the space between the number or the characters and the edge of the cell gets bigger. If I change the cell spacing, the space between the edge of the cell and the border of the table gets bigger. Okay, so that's the difference between those two. Alright, generally I would say that you want to leave all of these as 0 because we can do the same exact thing with styling and have a lot more control over our table. But for this week, you'll probably, the assignment asked you to adjust these values. Okay. Alright, so we now have our basic table. Alright, so another common thing that you will have with tables is to add a head to your table. And a head is essentially the labels for that column, for instance. You see that a lot in tables. So I've copied the table that we just built above. So it's the exact same table. And now I'm going to add a head to it. So I'm going to start with T head. And this T head tag is actually kind of optional, but let's just go ahead and use it. The reason I'm using it is it's another way you can style a table when we get to that later in the semester. So just like before, inside the T head we're going to put a TR for a table row. But this time, to indicate that it's a head row, we're going to use the TH tag. You should always have the same number of headings in each row, and then I'll add some content in between. And when I save that, you can see that my table has added some bold letters in the top row that are my titles. Okay. For the next example, I want to show you how to merge cells in the same row. To speed things up, I've already built a table with 3 rows and 3 columns. Okay. And I've added some just basic alphabet information into each cell. So AA is row A, column A, etc. Row B. Okay, so if I want to merge cells in the same row, what I want to do is come up to the TD that is the cell I want to keep. So we're going to say call span equals 2. So the number is how many columns you're going to span. And then I want to delete the cell that I'm spanning across. Okay, so step 1 is to add call span equals 2 to the row you want, or to the cell you want to keep, and then you're going to delete the cell that is going to be spanned across. So if I save this, you can now see that the AA cell spans across 2 rows, I mean 2 columns. Sorry. All right, if you wanted to do more spanning, that's possible. So let me come down to row 3 here, and I can do call span equals 3. Okay, and then because I'm spanning across 3 columns, right, if I don't delete those other cells, my table gets all messed up, right? So you can see that it has done that on the right. And this is the common mistake people make with tables, is to not remember to delete the extra cells now. So I'm going to delete the 2 extra cells below it, and now you can see my table is fixed and the CA row spans all the way across the table. You can do the same thing across multiple rows. So if you want to merge 2 cells in the same column, different rows, you're going to add the TD to the TD row span equals 2 this time, and then you're going to delete the column directly below that cell. Okay, so this time it's going to be in a different TR. And when I do that, you can see that now my AA cell has crossed 2 rows. Okay, and just like before, you can also do this across more rows. So I'll add a row span 3. To the last thing, and remember, if you don't delete the extra cells, you're going to make your table look weird over on the right. So this time I want to delete the 2 cells in the 2 rows below it. So the row below it would be the BC and the CC in this case. Delete and delete. Okay, so now my AC cell spans across 3 rows. You can also merge rows and columns at the same time. So again, here you're going to start by putting row span and col span in the cell you want to keep. So I'll choose the BB cell to keep in this case, and then I'm going to delete BC, CB, and CC. Alright, so row span 2 and col span 2. Okay, and then if I save that, my table gets all messed up over here, looks weird, but I want to delete the cell in the same thing because I did col span 2 in the same row, right? So I did col span 2, so delete the cell in the same thing. But then I also did row span 2, so I need to delete all the cells below that, which was CB and CC. Alright, so I'm going to save that, and you can now see that I have BB spanning across 2 rows and 2 columns. The last thing I want to talk about is adding style to your table. So there's a couple things that you can do to a table. Actually, there's a lot of things you can do to a table. We'll just talk about a couple here. So the first thing that you can do either with a style or with an attribute is adjust the width of the table. So I'll start with it as an attribute. And the value of this can be either a number or a percent. The number would be pixels. So if I save that, you can see that the table has now spread out across the whole table. Let me put a border back on so that you can see exactly where the table is. Okay. So you can also apply styles to the table. So style. And we could have done the width here as well. So I could do width 300 px. So for an absolute width. And then I'm going to delete the other width from the table since they will contradict each other. And you can see that the table over on the right has adjusted its width to be 300 pixels wide. So both of those are valid ways to control the width of your table. You can also add any other CSS you want to your table. So let's do background color, for instance. And I'll do a light gray, and you can see that the table has become light gray. But you can also apply styles to any of the other tags in your table. So for instance, the table row. So same procedure, you're going to come into the TR and add the style attribute, and I will change the color to white. Oops, background color I meant. And there we go, background color white. Alright, you can also add them to the TDs as well. So style, again, and you can see that I've changed the color of the background of the AA cell to be kind of a orange color. There are other things you can add here. You could adjust the height. Pixels, and you can see that my first row has all become 100 pixels because you can't have a different height for one cell than you do for another cell. So if you apply it to one, it applies to that entire row. Okay. Right. And you can also adjust the horizontal and vertical alignment of text. So I can do text right, and the AA moves to the right of the cell, and V align for vertical align. We'll do bottom, and that moves the AA to the bottom of the cell. Okay. So there's lots of different ways you can organize the content of your cells. All right, and you can do a different thing for each TD. But that's the basic idea.